Hello, welcome to Chapter 3, Part 2 for my Catholic superhero novel, Task. Let's get right back to it. Matthew went past Luke and Mary's office, and then Anne and Joachim's. Joachim was reviewing spreadsheets when Matt walked by. "Hey, bro-law," he said. "Hey, Matt," Joachim called over his shoulder. "Everything add up?" Matthew asked. "Yes, of course it does," Joachim said with some concern. "Did you find an error somewhere?" "Just making conversation," Matthew said. "See you tonight." Joachim's power gave him extreme precision with measurements and estimates, extreme facility with basic mathematics up through algebra, and an extreme compulsion to stick with exactly what the numbers said. It made him great as a bookkeeper. A side effect was that he could not lie, even to make a joke, which made him great as Anne's husband, but not the best conversationalist. Matthew kept walking down the hall, and stopped a few feet before reaching the window that looked into John and Faustina's studio. He took out his phone and opened Faustina's stream. She was mid-sentence. "In humility and simplicity of heart, the footsteps of the Virgin Blessed Therese, that we may attain to an everlasting reward. Amen." Faustina streamed on a short delay, which meant she had already finished the novena and was ending the show. Matthew pocketed his phone, marched down the hall, rounded the corner, and stepped into the studio. "Oh, he's here!" Faustina cheered. "Matt, quick, say hi to Michelle," she said as she waved at him to come over. Matthew took a stool and sat beside his youngest sister. She grabbed his arm and pulled him close. "Hey, Michelle, how's my favorite Frenchman today? Seminary life treating you well?" Matthew asked. Faustina put one of her earbuds in Matthew's ear as he was talking. "Bonjour, Matthew," Michelle responded. "It is. I'm older than most of my classmates, and they do stare at my wings sometimes, but still, we are becoming good friends." "Great," Matthew said. "On behalf of the Ward Transportation Company, I thank you for coming on the show today and for praying the Little Flower Novena with Faustina." "You are most welcome, mon ami," Michelle said. "It is an honor to pray with Faustina and her audience." "I'm so happy you came on the show and prayed with us, Michelle," Faustina said. "Johnny, could you please bid farewell to our guest and close the show?" Matthew asked. "It's time to take Faustina away for her birthday." Faustina turned to Matthew and tugged excitedly on his sleeve. "You have a surprise for me?" she asked. "Come see," Matthew said. He took out the earbud and went for the door. Faustina clapped with delight. "I love surprises," she squealed. "All right, everyone, I'm going to hand the show to Johnny. Remember, no afternoon stream today and no morning stream tomorrow. God bless you." Faustina took off the other earbud and followed Matthew through the door, while John switched from Faustina's camera and microphone to his own. "Let me add my thanks, Michelle," John said as the studio door shut. Faustina bounced to Matthew and gave him a bear... That's just give him bear hug. That's not correct. Gave him bear hug. She turned into a bear. No, ice powers. Let's see. Faustina bounced to Matthew and gave him a bear hug. "Biggest," she sang. "Littlest," Matthew sang back, returning the hug. Faustina released Matthew and motioned for him to follow her back around the corner. "That was a really cute way to end the show, Matt," she said, once they had cleared the studio window. "That's why I'm the CEO," he said. "My ideas are the cutest." Faustina laughed, and then she smiled broadly at him. She was the tallest of his sisters, and her wheat-colored hair reached almost to her waist. She wore a frilly blue shirt and a long brown skirt, and radiated a more than the girl next door beauty. "Does this cute idea include an actual birthday surprise?" Faustina asked. She clasped her hands in anticipation. "Yes, but not at this moment," Matthew said. "Aw," Faustina responded. "Well, it was very nice of you to give me that shout-out on Jenny's show." "On your birthday, it's the least I can do," Matthew said. "That and introduce you to your future husband." Faustina blushed and slapped Matthew's arm. "Stop it," she said. She was smiling. "Or what?" Matthew asked. "Or I will make you very chilly," Faustina stammered. Frost formed on her fingertips as she jabbed at Matthew. "I'm kidding," Matthew said. "Somewhat, at least." "Don't kid too much. This is a big deal," Faustina said. "I'm kind of nervous." "So is Jose," Matthew said. "Really?" "Yeah, he was even asking me what he should wear." Faustina looked Matthew up and down and shook her head. That poor man, Faustina said. He's going to look a mess, isn't he? I don't care for that insinuation, dear sister, Matthew said. Well, dear brother, Faustina began, I only insinuate it for your own good. Duly noted, Matthew said. Faustina crept closer. Do you think he'll like me? She whispered. Oh, easy, Matthew said. I just hope you like him. Faustina smiled. I told him to be himself, Matthew said. Not sure you should be giving romantic advice, Matthew, Faustina said. Why not? I mean, you haven't even brought your girlfriend to meet everyone yet. What's up with that? She teased. Matthew arched his eyebrows. Circumstances are slightly different, Faustina, Matthew said with a sigh. I really wish I could. I think you in particular would get along with Maggie. Faustina put her hand on Matthew's shoulder and leaned her head on his arm. I'm sorry, she said. That wasn't nice. No apology needed, Matthew said. Matthew, Faustina said as she took his hand, you need to give her a reason to wake up. Matthew looked down at Faustina as he considered what she said. The way she stared up at him reminded Matthew of when she was little. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. What was that for? She asked. For good advice, Matthew answered. Come on, John. It's Johnny. It's not John. It's Johnny. For good advice, Matthew answered. Come on. Johnny's probably wrapped up the show. Let me say hi to him before I check in with Dad. They went back to the studio and found that John had in fact finished the show. He was turning off the lighting rig. Great show today, John, Faustina said. She went to John and gave him a hug. People love seeing you and Michelle, he said. He patted Faustina on the head. Though some think you're going to be a chalice chipper. Ew, no way. Michelle is like Luke's age. Gross, Faustina protested. What's so gross about being Luke's age or older? Matthew asked. Faustina made a face. You know what I mean, she said. John laughed. He was a younger, leaner version of Luke, only with dark hair and an inch less height. He was still taller than Matthew. He had on a black t-shirt and black jeans. John's power gave him the ability to pick exactly the data he wanted from multiple sources of information simultaneously presenting themselves to him. The catch was that the information had to come from man-made sources. Made him a great social media manager. The data don't lie, John said. Between it being the 9th day of the novena and having Michelle on, today's stream is right up there in our top 10, at least in live views. The ward name is safe in your hands, Matthew said. My industry-leading brand managers know their work. It's easy when no one else is in our industry, John said. Transportation is a big business sector, Matthew protested. Yeah, but who else is open only 8 weeks a year and uses wormholes? John countered. He has a good point, Matt, Faustina added. No, he doesn't, Matthew said. They're portals, not wormholes. There's no such thing as portals, Matt, John replied, shaking his head. I'm the one who makes them, so I get to call them what I want, Matthew said. Wow, so mature, Faustina mocked. I'll pray you can be this mature when you're 33, was Matthew's comeback. He's talking old man talk again, John said to Faustina. I know, so sad no one listens, Faustina responded. No respect for your elders, Matthew murmured. If that's how you whippersnappers are going to treat me, I may as well go see Dad now. Hey, you just got here, John said. Don't go yet. I want to do a KPI report. Sorry, John. I'm late as it is, Matthew said. I'll see you at dinner. With Jose. He winked at Faustina. A new victim for the gauntlet, John cheered. Faustina's face reddened, but she was still grinning. Older brothers are the worst, she said. I'm going to tell Dad you said that, Matthew teased. Faustina waved Matthew away. He shot John a smile and then left the studio and continued down the hall. Dad's office was beyond the break room. The door had a sign that read, Office Manager. It was shut. Matthew knocked. Come in, Matty, Dad said. Matthew opened the door and stepped into his father's office, which was easily the most well-appointed room in the building. Hardwood floors, windows overlooking pristine New Hampshire forest, sumptuous paintings on the walls. Matthew may have been the CEO, but his father was the VIP of the Ward Transportation Company. Hey, Dad, Matthew said. Matthew's father was tall, trim, and just shy of 60. He had thick salt and pepper hair and... dark mustache. And dark mustache. As if it was that sort of quality. Oh, that's funny. All right, let's try that again. Hey, Dad, Matthew said. Matthew's father was tall, trim, and just shy of 60. He had thick salt and pepper hair and a dark mustache. His eyes were dark brown and empathetic. He was wearing a navy blue suit with a Knights of Columbus pin in the lapel. Son, sit down, he said. He was already sitting behind his desk. When you start like that, I know it's going to be a rough conversation, Matthew said as he fell into the chair on the other side of the desk. Dad shook his head. Not so bad as you think. I just want you to be more thoughtful with your words. This about Jenny's show? Matthew asked. Yes, Dad said. You got through the interview okay, but you're not thinking about the future. Matthew furrowed his brow. What do you mean, Dad? You told Jenny you were taking care of Maggie because that's what Jesus commands. Yeah, what's wrong with that? It's true, but not completely true. Matthew did not speak. His father was right, but he had felt compelled to say something true without telling Jenny everything about Maggie. Matthew, what's going to happen when Maggie finally wakes up? His father asked. What's going to happen when your feelings for each other become clear? People will think you used Jesus as an excuse. You know, I don't want him to say Jesus. I want him to say the Lord there. I want him to say the Lord. Oh, I hit the mic. All right, hopefully that wasn't so bad. Matthew, what's going to happen when Maggie finally wakes up? His father asked. What's going to happen when your feelings for each other become clear? People will think you used the Lord as an excuse. It discredits the faith. Matthew swallowed. Dad was right. You've got a point, Dad, Matthew said. I'll have to think on it. That assumes this really is more than just dreams, of course. Oh, Maddie, be honest with yourself, Dad said. You don't really believe that it's just dreams. You love Maggie. Is that what this meeting is really about? Matthew asked. My true feelings towards Maggie? Matthew's tone was sharp. His father folded his hands and covered his mouth with them, the way he always did when he was preparing to say something important, but had to think it through. Matthew silently waited. Son, I think you're scared, Dad finally said. Of what? Matthew asked. Of everything you'll lose if Maggie wakes up. Everything I'll lose? Matthew snapped. What are you talking about? I get my life back and a break from constantly using my powers, and most importantly, I get her. And what comes along with getting her? Dad asked. What comes along? It'll be real, Dad. Finally, I could hold her hand, really dance with her, really take her in my arms. And let's say you do all those things. Then what? Then, Matthew thought for a moment. Then Maggie would have to face a world that hates her. And that's it, right there, Dad said. You said Maggie would have to face the world. That's face the world. Oh boy. Yeah, again, this is why we're doing this, to correct all these things. It's working. Whew. All right, back to Dad. And that's it, right there, Dad said. You said Maggie would have to face the world, not that you would be facing it with her. Matthew's heart sank. He rubbed his palms on his thighs. His father was completely right. He felt like the cover over a deep pit of fear in his heart had been torn away. I've been afraid of what that will mean for me, for our family, Matthew said. Man, Dad, you don't have powers, but you're better than Luke and Annie combined. I'm their father too, Matthew, he said. Quotes. I'm their father too, Matthew. I have to do that again just because it was terribly read. I'm their father too, Matthew, he said. Your mom and I know all of you better than you know yourselves sometimes. What do I do? Matthew asked. What you've already prepared to do, Dad said. Last time we checked the bunker, I saw the rings in your room, Matthew. Weeks ago, Matthew had purchased an engagement ring for Maggie and wedding rings. He had wanted them to be on hand, but was not ready to ask Maggie to marry him yet. Or was he? He loved her, she loved him, and he had been caring for her for over 2 years. He had seen her at her absolute worst, had helped her to change, and wanted her by his side. And he realized he wanted to be by her side too, especially when she inevitably had to face the consequences for her sins. Ask her to marry you, Matthew. Ask her tonight. Dad, I can't just... You can, Dad interrupted. Think about how much of your life you've already committed to her. You just need to give her the rest. A memory came into Matthew's mind. I remember the first conversation I had with you about deciding to take care of Maggie, Matthew said. I said to you that I believed God was calling me to show love to her when no one else would. Do you still believe that, son? Dad asked. Matthew nodded. More than ever, he said. But I'm scared. Be not afraid, Matthew. The words reached deeply into Matthew, and he felt the fear in his heart start to dissolve. Thank you, Dad, Matthew said. He stood up. I'm meeting Mark for lunch, but I'm going to take some time in the break room to think and pray. Good decision, Dad said. Promise me that whatever you just did to me, you won't do to Jose tonight. Dad smiled. I promise, but only if he proves himself. Otherwise, all bets are off. Fair enough, Matthew said. And Maddie, Dad began, please remember your suit when we have clients. You look very unprofessional. I was wondering when you were going to say something, Matthew said. Mary and Johnny were the only ones who didn't. Mary is too kind, and John, despite his gift, is oblivious sometimes, Dad said. Matthew laughed. I'll see you at dinner, he said. I love you, Matthew. Love you too, Dad. Matthew departed his father's office and went to the break room. It was large and comfortable and decorated with a mishmash of the siblings' favorite things. A map of Middle-earth hung next to a signed poster from a classic Broadway show, both above a split amethyst-tinged geode on a pedestal. On the opposite wall, boxing gloves were suspended from a large iron nail next to an oil painting of a train speeding through a lush valley. A framed collection of foreign coins was mounted adjacent to a rubbing from an ancient tomb. Family pictures from Mark and Nisha's wedding, Mary's consecration, and Anne and Joachim's wedding were hung prominently. It felt more than a little like Mom and Dad's old house during the golden time right after Matthew had graduated college, when everyone was still under one roof. Matthew collapsed onto the couch opposite the kitchenette and fridge. He was sorely tempted to go to sleep, to see Maggie, but he knew he needed to pray. He took out his phone to use his prayer app, but after seeing how many notifications he had, Matthew put it back in his pocket. 10 fingers works fine, he mumbled to himself, and he began to pray the rosary, mostly mentally, a little out loud. He started to consider the first mystery he was praying, but his thoughts quickly turned to what his father had said. Ask her tonight. Is this your will, Lord? Matthew prayed. That question became the theme of his prayer, and the more he asked it, the more peaceful he felt. There was no audible answer or flash of insight, just a deeply rooted serenity that Matthew felt when he placed his intention to marry Maggie before God. There was no fear, only love. Matthew rested in that peace for the rest of the rosary. He finished his prayer with the sign of the cross. As his focus shifted back to where he was, Matthew realized Mark was leaning against the break room doorframe. How long have you been there, Mark? Mark shrugged. A few decades. I saw you counting them on your fingers. You hungry? Very. Mark went to the fridge and pulled out 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and 2 bottles of water. He came over and sat down next to Matthew and plopped the food and drink in his lap. Chicken cutlet, Italian style, Mark said. God bless our mother, Matthew replied. Amen, Mark said. The brothers said grace together and then went to work on the sandwiches. After he had eaten half his sandwich, Matthew turned to Mark. So, what business do we need to take care of? He asked. Forget business, Mark said. What were you praying about? Maggie, Matthew said. He took another bite. Haven't seen you that deep in prayer in a long time, Matt, Mark said. You're about to do something important. I am, Matthew agreed. What? I'm going to ask Maggie to marry me. Mark slapped his brother on the back. "Good man," he said. "You're finally taking up the cross." "Not a ringing endorsement of matrimony there, Mark." "But it is, though," Mark said. "Marriage is so good, Matthew." No, he doesn't call him Matthew. He says Matt. Come on. It's not Faustina talking to him. It's Mark talking to him. "But it is, though," Mark said. "Marriage is so good, Matt. Don't misunderstand. There's so much grace and joy. But it breaks you open, too. Everything inside comes out, one way or another. You've got to deal with that stuff for yourself and your wife all day, every day. And it mixes together. It can be overwhelming." Matthew looked at Mark and listened. "Nisha and I, we had to work through a lot of stuff about her brother. When he died, we mourned him together so much we didn't mourn him separately. And then there was the question of whether we would have ended up together if he hadn't died. Nish needed a lot of time, and it really sucked being apart." "I remember," Matthew said. "You hated not knowing how things would go." "So much," Mark agreed. "But my feelings didn't matter. I had to give her what she needed." He took a bite of his sandwich. "You were a disaster," Matthew said. "But I'd never seen you so patient either. It was a hell of a sacrifice." "And that's the thing. You've got to be ready to sacrifice," Mark said with a mouthful of cutlet. "When I married Nish, I knew I would die for her, but living for her every day, that's a whole different kind of thing." "A worthwhile sacrifice," Matthew offered. "No question it is," Mark said. "It's like I'm finally living for real by dying a little every day." "Dad told me I had already committed so much of my life to Maggie that I should just give her the rest," Matthew said. "Classic Dad," Mark said. "But am I really giving her anything? Or am I doing it for myself?" Matthew asked. "What do you mean?" "Am I taking care of her every day for her sake, or so I can feel self-righteous?" "Oh, both for sure, Matt," Mark answered. "You're a sinner like the rest of us." Matthew grimaced. "Can't argue with that." "Just accept that you have mixed motives and then still do the right thing," Mark said. "The purer motive will start to win out if you keep it up." Matthew reflected for a few moments. I think he'd say gonna. I don't think he'd say going to. "I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna change it. I'm gonna do it tonight. I'm gonna ask Maggie tonight. Yeah, it's gonna again. Man. Read the words that are on the screen. Okay. Let's try it again. I'm gonna do it tonight. I'm gonna ask Maggie tonight." "Good, Matt. I'll pray for you," Mark said. "Thank you. But there's something you have to do first." "What?" Matthew asked. "Finish your sandwich, or I'll do it for you." "COO's not supposed to tell the CEO what to do, Mark," Matthew replied. He then took a big bite of the sandwich. Mark nodded. "You keep telling yourself that," he said. They sat in silence for a few minutes while Matthew finished eating. "We should talk a little business while I'm here," Matthew said. "All right, I'll give you the update," Mark said. "Today's client is paid. We've got a full client list for summer and fall, and winter is almost booked up. The acquisition is proceeding smoothly. Foreign sites too? Foreign looks better than domestic right now, actually, but we're still on pace for the target date." "Good," Matthew said. "Anything else?" "That's it," Mark said. "Thanks, Mark," Matthew said. "I mean, it was a pretty sparse report, but you're welcome." "No," Matthew said, "for the conversation." "Oh, I didn't say anything you don't already know, Matt." "There's a long distance between the head and the heart, Mark." "True enough. And speaking of distance, I've got a portal to upstate New York to catch," Matthew said. "I'll see you tonight." "Love you, Mark." "Love you too, Matt," Mark responded. "Say hi to Maggie for me." "Will do." Matthew stepped away from the couch, opened a portal to HQ, and stepped through. As Mark watched the portal close, he realized something. Matthew had left his trash on the couch. "You son of a sea cook," Mark grumbled, but he still took care of it. I might actually have to change that. I looked up the meaning of son of a sea cook. It's actually not pleasant. I'll think on that one. Anyway, thank you for watching this far. I really appreciate it. that's the end of Chapter 3, Part 2. If you don't mind, I would really appreciate you leaving a comment, and also, of course, liking, sharing, subscribing, all of that internet stuff. It really goes a long way to helping get more visibility for this project. Thank you so much. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.
Ooh, ancient province.